Hello and good morning. My name is Vicki Larson, and I am the Lifestyles editor, writer, and columnist for the Marin Independent Journal, the newspaper for Marin County. And I am delighted to be your moderator for today's Commonwealth Club Marin series, supported by the Marin Community Foundation and Relevant Wealth Advisors. It's nearly the end of July, and along with the rest of the Bay Area, Marin is experiencing an increase in COVID-19 cases. Our plans to fully reopen the county have had to been slowed as county leaders try to reduce the transmission of the coronavirus in the area. Of course, the entire county, like the rest of the country, has been dealing with this since March. And many of our lives, from our work, from shopping, from school, look totally different than they did just a few months ago. And the impact on the Marin community has been profound. We are a different place than we were just a few short months ago. And today, we're going to talk to three community leaders in Marin who are facing the pandemic in different ways. We often talk about case counts, hospitalizations, and sadly, deaths when we're talking about COVID-19. But today, we're going to talk about our county and how specific parts of our county and communities are doing, with three key leaders in Marin. Mike Blakely, the Chief Executive Officer of the Marin Community Forum, Gabriela Colicchio, the head of the Marin Cultural Services, and Omar Carrera, the CEO of the Canal Alliance. But first, before we start our conversation, an important housekeeping note. If you have a question for any one of our guests, please post them on the YouTube chat form, and they will be forwarded to me in the program, and I will ask those questions later in the program. Okay, let's begin. I'm going to ask each of our guests to speak for a few minutes about their organization and what their organization does and how the people in the communities they service are doing and how they've been impacted by the pandemic. And Omar, I want to start with you because I think there can be no discussion about reopening the county or moving forward unless we really address our essential workers, many of whom are Latino and live in the canal, which has been devastated by the pandemic. So can you tell me a little bit about the Canal Alliance and what you're seeing in the community and what needs to be done?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Canal Alliance exists to break the generational cycle poverty for Latino immigrants and their families by lifting barriers to their success. We are located in San Rafael and have been serving the community since 1982. We have seen how COVID-19 has disproportionately affected low-income communities, most of them communities of color. Non-profit organizations that meet the needs of these populations also face historical challenges. The top three challenges our industry is facing are maintaining the financial health of the organization, providing effective support to staff needs to work successfully in a virtual world, something that many organizations never intended to do due to the nature of the work, and be able to respond to the growth in the demand for services and the rapid change in client needs. Canal Alliance has successfully responded to these three challenges. Our strong financial position that we had before COVID-19 has allowed us to maintain not only all our services available to the community, but also to provide job stability to our workforce during this complex year. We have been able to transition 90% of our programs to a virtual environment. By fall, 100% of our programs will be available. And also we have to add new programs to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. That has allowed us to stay relevant to the community needs. And for that, we have partnered with the Department of Public Health to launch new programs and services in the community. We are currently supporting the mobile testing site in the canal. We are coordinating the distribution results. We are coordinating the services for positive cases. We are providing a financial assistance to thousands of people. And very soon, we will be launching a contact tracing program to support those initiatives. We had to recognize that the Latino community is the most impacted in Marin County. But that is due to the historical inequities that Marin County always had before COVID-19. So it's not that COVID-19 came and suddenly we have issues with digital divide, with housing, with employment, and with many other issues. And Latinos, as you mentioned, Vicky, they have been the essential workers before COVID-19, during COVID-19, and most likely post-COVID-19. Essential workers have been in the front line since day one. And thanks to them is that many of us have been able to work from home successfully. Thank you. Happy to expand more later with all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Omar. Next, I want to talk to Mike, the CEO of the Marin Economic Forum, which I know focuses on economic vitality in the county. It's probably not an easy time right now. Mike, can you tell a little bit about your organization and how you are addressing the pandemic?
Yes, thank you very much, Vicki, and good morning, everybody. What a pleasure to be here. Yes, indeed, these times are very interesting for all of us here. The Marin Economic Forum is a nonprofit public benefit corporation. So we serve the community at large, and unlike a Chamber of Commerce, we're not member-based and we don't advocate for specific things. In fact, we operate more like a think tank, and we produce research and data and strategy development for both the public sector and the private sector, really to help guide decision-making as it relates to matters of the economy here in Marin. And so much like the rest of the world, the Marin economy has suffered drastically from this event. There are some things that are unique to our economy that have made the problems worse, but in some cases where we've also been able to show some resiliency. So just as the rest of the country was asked to shut down in order to try to control the spread, the businesses here in Marin that were asked to shut down were significantly affected because they serve primarily the resident population. So here in Marin County, if you look at the composition of our economy, you'll find a high number of personal service type industries, such as salons, yoga studios, restaurants. And in fact, those are the businesses that have been most acutely affected because they've not been allowed to serve their regular customer base. So it's not just the story of those businesses needing to temporarily shut down or struggle through these times, but it's also their employees. And as we know, most of the employees in those service sectors tend to be from the lower economic strata. And so they have been even more adversely affected because they've not been allowed to work. So here in Marin, we've seen a number of businesses have been able to access federal assistance, and the different jurisdictions in Marin all acted very quickly with the county to set up other financial assistance programs, small grant funds. And so there was a very good response to serving the immediate needs of our small business community and trying to help them survive. But now we're at a point in time where those funds are starting to run out, and we're starting to see a resurgence of cases. And in some cases, we've had to pull back the reopening of certain sectors, which had been in some cases open for just a day or two. And so obviously the uncertainty of all of this means that it's difficult for businesses to plan. And if there's anything businesses don't like, it's uncertainty. And if you unpack that uncertainty, it's not just will we control the spread of the virus? It's things like how are consumers going to react? What are their consumption patterns going to look like? Again, just to remind you that the personal services sector that plays such a significant role in the economy has been most adversely affected here. So we've got this situation where what is the future of a consumer economy when consumers are behaving totally different than they did before? So all of our small businesses in our main streets are now, forced with this uncertainty of whether their customers are going to come back. And one of the things that really brings to light, much like Omar mentioned about pre-existing conditions before COVID, we already had a number of our businesses that were facing challenges before. So particularly in the retail sector, there's been a large shift to e-commerce and to online shopping. That was already happening before COVID. That has shifted dramatically in the last 3 or 4 months. And that digital shift is going to be permanent. And that's everything from working from home, which means people aren't buying lunch at our small restaurants. It means working out from home, which means all of our gyms and yoga studios are having to shift online, which is really only bringing in a small percentage of the revenue of before. And so these are the issues that we're faced with now, that although it's an affluent community, and I mentioned there's some areas of resiliency, like home prices have stabilized, even there are some small increases over last year. Equity markets have stabilized. That's good for those Marin residents that have savings. But as we know, these pockets of resiliency are really related to the more affluent population. And as Omar just described, and as you described, Vicki, in the outset, those most affected by this have been those that were most vulnerable in the first place. So it's a little bit of a tale of two stories here in Marin. The affluent population, which also was able to quickly adjust to working from home, is managing okay in this. The small businesses and their employees and our residents that work in those small businesses and rely on them for income, they are the most adversely affected.
And now to you, Gabriela. I know that as the Director of Cultural Services for Marin, you run the Marin County Fair and been trying to, which we really missed this year, although there was some county fair food I hear was quite popular. You've been trying to promote the arts, and I will say that is something that I absolutely miss. I miss live music, theater, arts festivals. So can you tell me a little bit about what the Cultural Services does and how the pandemic is causing you to pivot a bit?
Absolutely. So as the Director of Cultural Services, I actually, our team produces the Marin County Fair, but our main year-round business is serving as a rental facility to hundreds and hundreds of different arts groups, artists, arts organizations, performing arts, visual arts. And in addition to that, I am also the Executive Director of our nonprofit, Marin Cultural Association. And the nonprofit's mission is to support art and culture in Marin County. It's pretty basic and simple. And basically, we've had to repurpose what we do here on the Marin Center campus and pivot over to supporting the pandemic. As most people know, we are and continue to be the point of testing for Marin County, one of the first points of testing and the largest. We also have an alternative care site set up in the exhibit hall, which at any point we are ready to activate. And at some point we had what we called the RV village in back of the exhibit hall to host those that were vulnerable in terms of housing and who were either positive or waiting for results as to whether they were positive or not. So that's kind of the county side of things. A couple of months ago, when the county launched MarinRecovers.com, I was asked to head up two sectors. One was hotel hospitality, and the other was the art sector. And as we all know, there are many different genres within the arts. So I have spent a lot of time talking to those that are running dance studios, running the theater companies that exist here, running the film places where we produce independent films across the genres. Everybody is really, really hurting. Most of the organizations that had any kind of real budget over $1 million have had to lay off the vast majority of their staff. Across the country, nobody knows when mass gatherings will be allowed again, when we will once again be able to gather in a venue like the one you see behind me, which is the Marin Veterans Memorial Auditorium. And when we are allowed to reopen, it will be with a minimum number of audience members so that we can be socially distanced. And if you look at a venue like ours, we have 2,001 seats in the venue behind me. And right now, Dr. Willis is saying when and if we are allowed to reopen, it will be with 500 people. Well, nobody can produce any kind of event in a 2001 seat theater with 500 people and break even. And that's what I'm hearing from the artists and the arts organizations surrounding us, is that we haven't figured out a way out of this yet and what it's going to look like on the other end. And just as a reminder, we did an art and culture plan that was adopted by the board in May of 2019. And in that plan, we worked with Americans for the Arts, and we did an economic survey on the impact of the arts in Marin County. And in 2018 alone, the arts contributed $76.4 million to the economy in Marin County. So we're not just talking about all of the other things that the arts bring to our community and the value there, but we are also talking about economics when it comes to the arts sector.
Right. Yeah. Yes. It seems also dire with, as Mike was saying, so much uncertainty. Businesses can't plan, consumers can't plan. And I don't know about other people, but I'm very cautious with my money now, because as a consumer, I'm not really quite sure what my livelihood is going to be, whether it's going to continue at the same salary. I depended on Airbnb income to support myself. That is gone. And so I want to ask you, Mike, even restaurants, I heard a number that somewhere like 30 to 80% of restaurants are going to be gone. And I spoke to a restaurateur who is worried once weather changes and we can't do outside dining. If there isn't inside dining, he's not going to be able to make it. And I hear that over and over. So what do you see ahead?
Well, let me, I'll try to take restaurants first, and then I'd like to talk more broadly about consumer demand, because in the beginning, this is something that we were saying was going to be the big issue here, because even if you open, will somebody come, as you just explained? So restaurants have really had a tough go of this. Not only have they been forced to pivot their operations, which has not only involved expense, but it has also involved downsizing. And so there's no real winners on the restaurant scene out of all of this, even though some organizations that were already focused on takeout only, you could say they've been able to sustain, but they're certainly not winning. One of the sad things about the restaurants from a data perspective is that all the major financial institutions have been analyzing the transactions of their credit cards and their debit cards. And what they have been finding is that where spending on those credit cards has gone up for restaurants also correlates to where cases of the virus have gone up. And unfortunately, they put out this data in a very big way, which scared off people from restaurants, even though the restaurants are doing all that they can to try to make sure that it's a safe environment. So we have a lot of restaurants in Marin County. I hear from those owners frequently. They're very concerned about their future. Even some of the beloved places in Marin County have had to close down. And for those of you that maybe not just ice cream, maybe not just restaurants, but there's the famous story of Three Twins Ice Cream, which is a beloved brand, had to actually go out of business. And so from the food industry and the restaurant industry, they're extremely hard hit. What we're watching very carefully, though, are two things on the demand side, and that is consumer sentiment and consumer behavior. So from the sentiment perspective, this is where opinions vary. But the reality is that there are certain signals that consumers will respond to in terms of how they feel comfortable getting back out there. And so, as most people have tried to say, once a vaccine is available, that will go a long way psychologically to making people feel more comfortable about getting out. But there was actually a poll done by the strategy company McKinsey that asked people to sort of rank in order what signs they needed to see that would make them feel comfortable going out and resuming their consumption, getting into stores, going to restaurants. And the number one thing was not a vaccine, but was when a public health official comes out and publicly says it's safe to do this. We haven't really seen very much of that. Here in Marin County, what we've seen is the Marin Recovers effort that Gabriela alluded to is trying to be very public and trying to do a very good job of informing the public of what's open, what's not, and what's safe to participate in. And the businesses are following very closely what Marin Recovers is advising. So we're all trying to convey that message of confidence to consumers, but it's a great unknown. The other more important part, as I mentioned, is the behavioral behavior of consumers, because that is where the money is actually being spent. And what we've seen there, and I mentioned this in the opening, was this shift to digital. And that is going to have a huge effect, because some of you may have seen in the last 3 months, the level of online consumption has matched the growth of the last 10 years. That's an astounding figure. This is data supplied by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what the Bureau also went out and projected, it was to say that if the online consumption patterns that existed the last 3 months continue for the next 3 months, that would be equal to almost $150 billion of business that would have gone to brick and mortar businesses that will have shifted online. And so for those small retail stores here that have been able to develop e-commerce, that's okay, but that doesn't nearly tap into the online consumption behavior that we're seeing occur and that is likely to continue.
Right. So let's assume that a number of our small businesses are not going to be able to make it. What happens to our towns? What happens to, San Anselmo and Mill Valley, which have very vibrant downtowns or had? If there's nothing that's going to bring people downtown, no music venues, no shops, it's very hard to imagine what a future is going to look like.
That is the question. And, but that from our perspective, we believe that really needs to be a community-driven process. And so we've been talking with the county and other stakeholders from the business community about the need for a longer term economic strategy for Marin County. We have never really had one of those in the past, and that would be the perfect place to bring the community together and to decide for ourselves what we want the Marin County economy to look like, because we are going to have to deal with these repercussions from this, just like the county has had to deal with the Great Recession. But my point here, and what MEF is really advocating and wants to facilitate, is this has to be a community discussion, because economies are much more than just the businesses or the jobs. They're the higher education system. They're the social sector. We need to make sure that any kind of recovery that happens in Marin is equitable and inclusive. But we also need to make sure that it recognizes that times have changed. The Bay Area is a hyper-competitive marketplace. And so what Marin is going to do with its economy really needs to be discussed and debated. And again, it needs to be a community process so we can decide for ourselves what we want in the future.
Right. So Omar, because a lot of the Latino community works in restaurants and in the service industries that are struggling, does the Canal Alliance have a plan to maybe help train people in new things, or what are you doing to help the community with the unemployment that's hitting so hard there?
Yeah, and before I answer that question, if I may just put you some context about the topic the Mike was talking about. There's a lot of businesses that are not going to be able to come back or at all. And I think that in the restaurant industry, we are seeing already that, the impact that those businesses now have by implementing health protocols, right? Because now they had to provide PPO, they had to, there's a decrease in the customer base, similar to what Gabriela was sharing in the art industry. We were seeing this, so we add cost to small businesses, right? These health protocols cost money, and at the same time, the customer base went down. So all the people that were working for those businesses, they never came back, right? Not all were back. Remember, I believe we were close to 2% unemployment rate before COVID-19. So a lot of people were working, and now the essential workers didn't go back to work in the same way that they were doing before COVID-19. And these are people that need the daily income to survive. So, and that has created other social issues and problems that are invisible to us now, but they are coming our way. And one of them is the housing crisis. We have a debt accumulation that's growing every single day. And we have not created policies that help us fight that. We have right now an eviction moratorium that is really, I mean, it's helpful, but
Yes.
what all it does is just postpone the problem to a later day for us to talk about, right?
Right.
And then it's going to be bigger and unmanageable. So instead of discussing things, how can we focus on particular census tracts with low-income communities? What can we do to protect them? And what can we do to support all the work that we are doing with public health department and other nonprofits at the ground level? The policy, I think that's one of the weakest things in the county around reopening the economy or dealing with this crisis is at the policy level. I will say respectfully with Marine Recovers, the structure, it was focusing primarily on the business side.
Yes.
And they forgot in one of the most important things that any business have, which is the workforce, right? Cities need the sales taxes the businesses provide. And businesses need the talent to be able to be successful. So when we were looking at Marine Recovers, it really lacked of attention to the worker side. So we were paying attention to businesses that make sure that they have the health protocols in place, that they understand social distancing, that they have information about educating their customers. But we didn't care what happened with that worker goes back to their neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know, that worker also is a consumer. So that worker is going to go to a local business in the neighborhood to shop. Think about inequities. Inequities don't limit only to individuals. Inequities also affect businesses. We have a lot of Latino-owned businesses in the canal that nobody is providing technical assistance or support. They're not even under the umbrella of the Chamber of Commerce. So there's a lot of inequities that have made the problem worse. So what we are doing to respond to this new economy, because I don't think we're going to go back to what we used to be.
Right.
We're going to go back to a new world, a new economy with new challenges and also new opportunities. Before COVID-19, we have a workforce program that we're focusing on the needs the businesses had at that point. Now, many of those businesses will change, including retail and hospitality. And what we are looking at is what are the opportunities now? And the opportunities for us in this moment is in public health. So we're just launching a contact investigator program in partnership with the Public Health Department and UCSF. We are training people to get certifications in that field and provide support to the county in an area that's crucial to make sure that we have a successful isolation strategy in place. Because if people continue to be infected and they live in overcrowded environments and they don't get all the support that they need, let me tell you, there's no reopening the economy at all unless we deal with that.
Yeah, I hear you, and it was frustrating for me to think that we didn't really have enough foresight that knowing that so many of the essential workers lived in the canal, that should have been one of the first places that we had a testing site. And we also should have had a plan to give a safe place for people to quarantine so they didn't bring it back to the canal area. And it seems that we still don't really quite have that. And yet we have hotels that are sitting empty. And that seems to me that would be something that we could be doing and maybe should be doing. Do you have a place where people can go to quarantine safely so that we don't keep reinfecting the canal area? Is there talk of that?
So, the Public Health Department is the one that leads all those initiatives, right? Including the quarantine component to it. My understanding is that we have a partnership with a Novato hotel. And the capacity of the hotel is 26 rooms. This is the part that I don't understand. And I think really clearly explains the challenges that we have, right? And the loopholes in the system that we have created to respond to this crisis. We have a hotel with 26 rooms. They never got to the point to be overcrowded. I don't see in the county us going to start building temporarily tents to isolate people successfully. We have not got to the point to maximize the use of the only hotel that we have in the county. And we have thousands of people that are being affected by COVID-19 that we know that they cannot isolate at home because they share homes with other families. They have one bathroom and all that. So why is that? So we have done, I think, a poor job really understanding how this is affecting low-income communities and quickly respond to that by providing an effective isolation strategy. So COVID-19 requires a collective approach. This is not about an issue of the public health department or an issue of a Canal Alliance. This is a county issue, and we all need to work together to support the communities that need the most. In this case, that community also are the essential workers for the county. So why we only have one hotel? That's the question. We have a lot of hotels, and Mike can maybe expand on that. We have a lot of hotels. They are empty buildings. They prefer to be empty instead of stepping up and helping the crisis. I don't understand it. Are we on this together or we not? And I think that is the big distinction. So what we are doing is keep advocating and pushing the county to continue adding capacity in the isolation strategy, because without that, we are not going to get out of this crisis.
Right. Well, speaking of hotels, Marin has a big tourism economy, Mike. What's happening with that is a question from a listener.
There's a positive and negative opportunity here as it relates to tourism. Obviously, the hotels that we just spoke about, they are empty. Part of that is because of the mandates and the laws around that, and the shelter in place. And the other part of it, as I said before, is with consumer sentiment of not really feeling safe to go out and travel. So of course that sector, and again, in acknowledging what Omar was talking about, that sector is, largely fueled the workforce is, our low income communities here in Marin County. So it's again, I keep emphasizing, it's not just the business owners that are losing here, it's the employees that work there as well. Now, if there is a positive side to this, it's that what we observe with traveling patterns now is that people are sort of taking day trips. And the Marin tourism economy has always really been based on people in the Bay Area or people staying in a place like San Francisco, taking these day trips to places like West Marin and other areas in Marin County. If you talk to the Marin County Visitors Bureau, they will tell you that their strategy has always been how to get, as we say, more heads in beds and trying to get those people to stay in Marin County overnight. That's always been the desire, instead of having people pass through on their way to Napa and Sonoma and other attractions. So there may be an opportunity to, I won't even say sustain, but to try to continue some tourism revenues through these day trip opportunities, which are not just about hiking and biking, but we do have arts here. We do have culture here. We do have some interesting restaurants that are still open. I mean, there are a lot of things to promote about visiting in Marin. But, is it the time to be putting money into that? Some people say yes, some people say no. But I think going forward in the immediate term, it makes sense to try to capture those day trip people from around the Bay Area that don't require plane travel and can get in their cars and can come here and patronize the businesses that are still open and enjoy all that Marin has to offer.
Right. Gabriela, are any of the arts organizations looking at doing outside venues like the restaurants have pivoted to dining outside?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of the performing arts are exploring how they can do performances outside, but you have to remember that still right now, the shelter in place orders say that you cannot have more than 100 people gathering outside. Mm-hmm. You can only have 100 people or less gathering, and it has to be for a faith-based services. So right now, we've had lots of organizations that we've tried to support putting together an outdoor event, but the reality is that 12 people is the maximum you can have in any single gathering outdoor unless it's faith-based at this point. So lots of arts organizations are planning things for the future, but there's this, who knows when? We don't
Right.
know when things will open up. There's a lot of streaming going on, and that's good. And of course, there's lots of information in the IJ about how to access both the streaming and the visual galleries that are being put online, but none of that is supporting financially anyone.
Right.
I mean, that's not putting money in the pockets of the artists or the crew or any of the other people that have been impacted desperately by this.
Yeah. Well, how can we save the arts and art groups? Does anyone have an idea, a plan? I mean, I know there's Patreon, things like that, but that's not really going to save people.
Well, one of the things that we are doing, the nonprofit, the Marin Cultural Association, is we are looking at developing an art and culture recovery fund to try and support some of the artists and some of the arts organizations that are best, that are already in a position where they have a better chance of survival. So that's one initiative that we are actively working on. I also think that the industry as a whole, the entire sector, is rethinking how we create and engage and produce art for different audiences. So it's not, you see these empty seats behind me, it's not necessarily going to be the way it has been for thousands of years, where people pay for a ticket and come and sit in that audience and observe what's happening on the stage. I think all of the normal models are up for discussion, and as an industry, we're rethinking the way we deliver the arts.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would just add to that to say that the arts sector in Marin County is just a huge part of our DNA. And when I talk about a long-term economic strategies, really what we're trying to do is to make sure that a sector like that, which may not be initially thought of as, a big business in Marin, but we're trying to make sure that they're at the table when we talk about what we want our economy to look like going forward. And so, as Gabriela mentioned, they did create a strategic plan. They are a vital part of our economy. And so going forward, we absolutely need that community to be in there, even though people don't immediately associate art like they do biotech or some of the other businesses that we have here.
Right.
And one of the issues even before the pandemic, as both Omar and Mike referenced before, is the arts were in trouble. Artists were exiting Marin County because they couldn't afford to live here. They couldn't afford to create their art here. And, going back to the whole racial inequities around Marin County, particularly BIPOC artists they can't afford to live here. They've been coming in from outside other communities in the Bay Area to perform here. And so we already had a major issue. This is one of the few wealthy counties in the country that doesn't have a dedicated funding source for the arts. And that was actually something we were working on prior to the pandemic, working on the idea of a dedicated tax of some sort to support the arts. So, all of that's kind of been put on hold, but it's time for us to rethink how we get this started again. And I think the Art and Culture Recovery Fund will be one way that we can begin to address that. And partnerships, Omar and I, the Canal Alliance, Marin Cultural Association, the department for the county, we are all working together on projects that hopefully will enable us to bring the arts and sustain them in a different way.
Yeah. A lot of people are hopeful that we come out of this pandemic as better people with a more equitable county, and talking about unaffordability. It seems like we really need to rethink our housing situation here so that artists can live here, so that you don't have to pack 2 or 3 families in a 2-bedroom apartment. because this seems to be, this may not be the only pandemic that is in our future as the climate changes and we don't really know. And I think we just have to reimagine a future that we will be faced with more of these kind of things, and we need to get people housed and safe and fed. And I'm wondering, Mike, is that kind of a conversation that that you're talking about in reimagining what Marin could look like that is more equitable and allows a diversity of lifestyles and economic realities?
Well, that is a huge question that I think everybody has an opinion and a valid opinion and perspective on. Just to unpack what you said a little bit, I mean, the housing issue has persisted in Marin for decades, and we know the challenges there, and it's frustrating at times that we can't seem to advance the issue to a point where it really provides the solutions that people are asking for, which are frankly obvious and credible solutions. But it remains a challenge. And as we saw just before this, the state of California was starting to play a heavier hand in the housing issue because jurisdictions just can't seem to get it done. And I imagine that while this pandemic has, continued to expose the vulnerabilities of people that don't have access to housing, I don't know that it's going to accelerate the community's desire to continue to build. And I'm not as hopeful as others may be that the situation will change here in Marin simply because of this pandemic, because as I said, it's a very long-standing challenge that just has not found easy solutions. But reimagining Marin County as a place that can bring in others, one of the things that most people may or may not know is that Marin County, frankly, from a demographic perspective, is old. In fact, I think it's the oldest county in the state. And there's a challenge on many levels that on the opposite side of that, we have in the Bay Area the lowest percentage of millennials in Marin County. Now, that presents a significant challenge not only to the economy, but to the culture of what the county is, as we've seen. And if you ask people, there are varying opinions as to why we don't have as many millennials here, including that it's very expensive to live here. That is a fact, including that perhaps it's not as diverse here as especially other regions in the Bay Area, and that might be a disincentive for people to locate here. I've heard people state that. But one of the other issues that we see at Marin Economic Forum that isn't talked about as much as one of the reasons is because we don't have the kind of jobs that are going to attract people here. Again, we have this concentration of low-wage service jobs that serve the local market, the local affluent market, but we don't have the kind of jobs that are going to inspire younger people to move to Marin County to make their career. And that's a problem because without that workforce locally here, and again, going back to some of the problems that existed before the pandemic, I mean, traffic in the Bay Area was very, very challenging and difficult. We don't have a good public transit system to move people in and out of Marin County. We have some bright spots with SMART and others that are attempts at facilitating that. But that's a big problem in terms of when you look at our makeup, our demographics, our life, our culture. I think that the fact that we don't have the types of jobs that are going to attract a diverse group of people to come here is a challenge. And again, something that could be considered as we look at longer term economic strategy for the county and bring in other perspectives and what we want that economy to look like.
Right. Just one question. Since so many more people are working from home, it doesn't really make a difference. They could live in Marin or live elsewhere. So that's something to consider too. If it seems as if more companies are going to allow their workers to work from home, I think Facebook or Google is predicting through at least spring of next year to work at home. So therefore, we probably need to be thinking of ways that we could attract people, because if they're working from home, it doesn't really make a difference where their jobs are.
Yeah, sure. And that's right. And again, as I said in the beginning, a lot of Marin County residents have been able to maintain that resiliency because they work in sectors where work from home was very easy to do, right? We have a large number of highly skilled professionals that work outside of the county to begin with, and they were, fortunately for them, able to make that transition of working from home because they work in the types of businesses that accommodate that, and they have the means to do that in terms of internet access and space in their house, et cetera, that others don't have. But let me just address two things. When I talk about the idea of jobs here, attracting the kind of jobs here that might change our demographics a little bit, there's a couple of things that are happening. Number one is there's this what's referred to as de-densification, and that is these large urban centers like San Francisco or Oakland and other areas across the country have seen both businesses and individuals look at strategies to move to the suburbs. So for Marin County, historically, there's always been this sort of desire that can't we capture a satellite office from some of these big, huge companies, whether they be tech companies in the South Bay or in San Francisco. Well, if you talk to the commercial real estate sector here in Marin County, you'll see that there is an uptick in interest of companies that want to put sort of a smaller office here. They want to move out of the urban center where they are and put a smaller office in a place like Marin County, where not only their workers may already exist, but where they may be able to attract that type of high-skilled worker that's already living here that is not going to be taking the ferry anymore because they're afraid of the risk. The second piece I'd like to note is the work from home in the beginning. There was a lot of appreciation from people who weren't able to do that before to do it because it really contributed to the work-life balance. It allowed people, allowed companies to understand that maybe they could reduce their footprint and save a little bit of money by taking that approach. But again, you have to start looking at the data now. And now that we're 3 or 4 months into this, we're starting to gather more evidence from those actual people that are working from home that aren't necessarily enjoying that. And I don't just mean those that are interrupted by their 2-year-old that comes running in there or the dog barking outside. I mean those that miss that contact and ability to create new ideas and innovate with their coworkers. And so you're starting to see the pendulum swing back to people who said, hey, this is great. Look at how much freedom this gives me. And this is so much more relaxed, to all of a sudden, I miss the office. I want to get back to the office. We can't function this way. We're not quite seeing it in productivity numbers yet, but we're seeing it in terms of sentiment. And so both those things, I think, bode well for Marin's future in terms of attracting a different kind of workforce here and attracting a different kind of company that's been here before. And again, I go back to this point where if we think about as a community what we want to do, we're obviously not going to pull in a 2,000 worker manufacturing type of entity here in Marin County, but there are niche opportunities that we have and could pursue.
Right. Omar, I have a question for you from a listener wanting to know if the digital divide is an issue for you, if you're now 90% virtual, and how are you addressing the digital divide, the issue?
Thank you. Just to add to your previous question around policies, I think what we have, not just in Marin County, but at the national level, we have a health crisis and also a leadership crisis. We are not talking about policies that are helping us do the work that we're doing at the ground level. Either we focus on the health crisis or we focus on the housing crisis or in the economic crisis. We had to choose. And yes, we have one of the oldest communities in Marin County, one of the healthiest communities in Marin County in the country, but also we have one of the most educated communities here. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that people are going to be able to understand the common good is what we need to thrive for. We need to make sure that everybody in this community is taking care of it. Because if one person is not safe, nobody's going to be safe. Now, the digital divide was one of those historical inequities that we have, right? We have a neighborhood that is surrounded of infrastructure, right? And yet it's not being connected to that infrastructure. So it's painful, and we have been communicating. I've been working in this issue for more than 15 years. The Marin IJ, if you actually go and do a research on digital divide, a historical view of the problem, you will see multiple articles the Marin IJ cover about this issue. And I have been advocating for it, but I was told we don't have the resources to deal with that, right? And I think we always try to push the pressure to the private sector for them to resolve social issues. And I believe that's the responsibility of the government, not the private sector. The government must lead the conversation. Government must bring parties together to the table to deal with issues like that. And I didn't see that before. Mm-hmm. We actually had to wait for a pandemic to come and suddenly make the digital divide an issue that is relevant for all of us to work on. You know, I was telling that the Art Canal students, they're not able to access to the internet. There's a lot of adults that they cannot access to technology. And the digital divide goes from ownership, knowledge, and also accessibility to the internet, right? Reliable internet accessibility.
Right.
And unfortunately, we didn't resolve the problem before when learning distance was implemented by the schools. We have a huge percentage of San Rafael students that were not able to connect to the classrooms. And that was due to all those issues that I mentioned. So yeah, it's a problem. And I'm pleased to share with all of you that the city of San Rafael has led the efforts to resolve the problem. And in partnership with the county and the private sector, we have been able to come up with a model to tackle some of the issues around with digital divide. It's not the solution that we need for the entire neighborhood, but it was a great first step towards that. And in addition to that, we are purchasing laptops, mobile hotspots, and trying to educate people the lack of all of that to suddenly understand how it is to be in a conversation like this via Zoom. All of us are learning how to deal with this virtual environment. Think about low-income communities. The understanding how to connect to the internet was not a top priority. It was just to survive.
Well, we are coming to a close of our program, and I want to thank all of you so much for your insights and thoughts. One final question for each of you is, what do you see happening over the next 6 months in the county? Gabriela, let's start with you.
Let's see. I think that it's going to be more of the same until we have a vaccine. I mean, that's the way we are looking at our business here. I think that's, you know, this virus will continue to make people very sick and to kill people until we have some way of stopping it. And so that's kind of what I think. And we will continue to come up with creative ways to get around it. I mean, some of the things I didn't mention earlier, we did the drive-in graduations. They were hugely successful. I mean, there are ways around the restrictions that we all have right now in the shelter in place to still bring community together, whether it's virtually or sitting in their cars, and still express those basic human needs to communicate with each other and to be together.
Mike, what do you see in the next 6 months?
Well, unfortunately, from an economic perspective, the global economy and certainly the Marin economy is not going to rebound like we had hoped when we were first talking about things like a V-shaped recovery. That's all been dashed by the reality of the virus, that we haven't been able to stop its spread. It's still creating huge uncertainty. And I agree with Gabriela that, you know, all signs point to nothing returning to normal or what we used to know until that vaccine is developed. I mean, I credit all the innovation I'm seeing on a global level, from, you know, sports leagues trying to institute, you know, and get back to playing, to all the heroic efforts that essential workers continue to make, and frontline workers continue to make to help people manage this. I just see that it's going to be more of the same until we come up with that sort of, okay, now we've got this figured out. And 6 months, from an economic perspective, we're talking about an economy rebound in late 2021, but maybe even 2024 before we see it to pre-pandemic levels. So from an economic perspective, it's going to be a long road. But the next 6 months, I just hope that people can, you know, manage as best they can on the public health side. And for those that can keep their livelihoods. I hope that we as a community, like Omar said, can pull together, look at the problem holistically, and figure out how we can get through this together.
And Omar, we only have a few minutes left, but what do you see in the next 6 months?
We will continue doing what we're doing right now, trying to fight the health crisis, and fighting the housing crisis, fighting the economic crisis that we all have. But I'm a little optimistic that perhaps conversations like this can really inspire people to do more and to do differently. We do need to make sure that everybody is safe in this county. We cannot ignore the historical pain the Black and Brown communities have had in this county. It's time to tackle that. We're not going to reopen the economy. We're not going to reopen schools. We're not going to get out of the watch list of the state of California unless we really have conversations around changing policies that can help those individuals. It's time for us to start talking about rental protections, real rental protections that can help us deal with the housing crisis. It's time to bring to the conversation rent stabilization in Marin County. It's time to start talking about minimum wage going up. We cannot go back to the jobs that we had before when people are not being paid enough to live in this county in a dignified way. So it's really time to have those conversations if we want to go back to a better world or just to a new world that we all want to build. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, that's all we have for today's program. I hope we can gather again in 6 months and discuss how things are doing. And hopefully we'll be able to do it in person. In the meantime, please continue to follow the great organizations represented here today, the Marin Economic Forum, the Marin Cultural Services Department, and the Canal Alliance. And of course, you can continue to follow all of the Commonwealth Club's programs at www.commonwealthclub.org. And we want to thank the Marin Community Foundation and Relevant Wealth Advisors for the support of Commonwealth Club. I'm Vicki Larson of the Marin Independent Journal, and this virtual Commonwealth Club program is now adjourned. Thank you all so much.